Welcome everyone. Welcome to Poets in Conversation. I'm Phyllis Klein, and with me tonight, I have the extreme pleasure of reading together with the brilliant Amanda Moore, whose new book, Requeening, came out with a flourish last fall, and rightfully so. You'll see why. So we'll be talking about the pandemic, bees, family, health, aging, bees, and the news. And did I mention bees? Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Phyllis, for the opportunity to read with you. I know you and your poems so intimately, it feels a little strange to read just your bio. But I will say, so for those of you who don't already know, Phyllis Klein is a psychotherapist and poet who lives in Palo Alto, California, just down the road from me here in San Francisco. Her work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including the Chiron Review, Sweet, Three Elements, I-70, the Minnesota Review, and Gyroscope Review, among many others. And I know she's sending her poems out these days, so let's be all excited for the ways that we're going to get to encounter them in journals coming up. She was a finalist in the Sweet Poetry Contest in 2017, the Carolyn Forche Humanitarian Poetry Contest in 2019, and the Fisher Prize also in 2019. She's been nominated for multiple Pushcart Prizes, and her new book, The Full Moon Herald, which is lovely and available from Grayson Books. I know we'll have a link in the chat for those of you who don't already have it. It's a newspaper of poetry and won honorable mentions in poetry for the Eric Hoffer Book Award in 2021. She loves to cook with farm fresh vegetables. During the pandemic, she has taken up exercising with YouTube and started Poets in Conversation as a way to get to know poets from all over the US and to cope with pandemic isolation. And we are all the beneficiaries of the work that she's done here and in her poems. I'm very excited to get to hear from her tonight.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. And thank you for reading with me tonight. I'm going to be reading some poems that didn't make it into my book tonight. They might have been published elsewhere. And also a few poems from my book, one of which I haven't read before at a reading. So I tried to pick a range of subjects that will give you an idea of the range of my writing style. And just to say a little bit about the book, I actually had another book in mind that I was working on, and Amanda, we can talk about this later, but she knows about that too. So and then I realized I was writing all about the news. A lot of my poetry was about the news. So I had the idea to make a book about the news. And then the idea of making it into kind of like a newspaper came along the way with some help from my partner, Len, and who actually helped me figure out to make it, to make the headings just like newspaper headings. So that's a little bit about my book. And when I read a poem that's from the book, I'll tell you what section it came from. So this first one, if you live in California and you drive and you turn 70, this will happen to you. Passing the written driver test at age 70 almost doesn't happen on the first try. The test cubicle is noisy, and inside your heart blasts in construction of a barricade between you and the disaster of failure. Everyone at the DMV has been so nice. The first window, a guy with a Golden State Warriors hat tells you his birthday is the same day as yours, except he was born somewhere in the 1980s. Asked you how you'll celebrate this year. Just let me keep driving for a while, you think. Your first wrong answer said blood alcohol level of a person over the age of 21. You were so sure it said under the age of 21. The computer points it out with a red X and a green check on what you should have marked. Such a dumb mistake. Are you reminding yourself or perhaps scolding yourself? Read the question. Take your time. Luckily, no one can hear. Drink some water. 18 little questions between you and your freedom. 15 right answers between the pretense of propriety and the ravages of old age. If only you weren't even more forgetful now than you always used to be. Second wrong answer, you can't even remember. Just put it out of your mind forever. And why are you now thinking about the $37 and qualifying for the real ID? Maybe it's because they made you go to a picture line before you took the test, and now you know why the picture will look like someone who should be your grandmother. Why couldn't they take it after you pass when there could be a chance of relief for a tiny portion of the wrinkles screaming under your skin? Here comes the question you remember from the hours of practice test. You even wrote down the answer in your 7 pages of double-sided handwritten notes. It's the hardest question in the lexicon. 2 answers so nuanced in meaning, like trying to distinguish between 2 fallen leaves on a hiking trail. Please, no more red X's. Skip the question. Computer asks, are you sure? No, not sure of anything, except there were a few correct answers, so keep on breathing. Everything in slow motion now, a few more correct ones. Last question. Your car is disabled, but you can't pull it off the highway completely. Do you call for help and stay in the car, or wait for a safe moment, exit the car, and wait away from the flow of traffic? How come you missed this as a practice question? Which way to point the clicker? When the screen says you passed, it seems unimaginable. What about the truck making the wide turn, the one you skipped? Even the DMV giving you a break as you watch from the side of the road, your car flashes on, but you away on a safer journey on the side of the licensed, a conqueror. Thank you. And what I hear is that you have to do it all over again at age 75. Okay. So something I forgot to mention in the introduction is that we really do welcome comments and questions in the chat, so that in case you have something you want to ask or something you want to mention and you might forget it, it's perfectly fine to do that. So this next poem is about insomnia. And I've written a lot about insomnia because I've had a lot of it. And it seems to perhaps be helping because it's getting better. Emergence. To learn sleep, not sleepwalk, not nightmare. To learn the wane of consciousness without fear. Sleep, something that was a fish gliding through scenic, serene waters, something striped with bold yellows and teacup blues, became a desert, trudged through the hell of a terrified mind. To see myself as an effigy, not hanged, not burned, a living, sleeping elegy, to die every night without dying, without worry, underwater breath, wake to the surface of light. Thank you. Okay, so this next one is a hard one. It's in the obituary section of my book. And it's real news and personal news. So the title is Western Black Rhino, 8 million, my mother, 97. 1. The night the western black rhino gasped, the full moon held vigil in a place where several mahogany trees wailed up from the flat earth along the river Nyong. A subspecies disappears, this one already a living fossil born 8 million years ago, no match for the millions of dollars its horn could call in. Still holding on while people pillaged. Mud-loving, mistakenly thought to be nearsighted, clumsy fast, big old herbivore, can't play your horn no more. The night you died out forever, why didn't I feel it? Where is your grave? Where are your mourners? Did you know what was coming, your thick hide, craving cool mud you couldn't find? What did you know when you couldn't detect another scent like yours anywhere anymore? 2. When my mother dies, will I grasp it before I am told? Will I feel it the same way I knew my sister was hit by an SUV and survived? Because I kept thinking about her, thinking about being run over and over in my mind. Saw a bus stopped on the road in front of me, thought that bus could batter me into the pavement. Even though we weren't speaking and I lived 3,000 miles away, I still knew. My mother, determined, terrified, how she could yell, trodden on, vindictive, holding out at 97, totally debilitated, demented, facing extinction. I didn't want us to end like this. Whatever was precious stolen, whatever was loving trampled, whatever trampled persistent as the beating of a determined heart. And this next one is in the opinion section of the book, which is where I put what I think of as good news stories. Holding a place for human kindness to go. Strangers until the homeless man moves into the rancher's apartment, the one he decided to build on his land, generous with California oak woodlands, with coastal sage scrubs. He doesn't realize it is greatness. Oh, I'm sorry. Generous, I skipped a line. Generous with California oak woodlands, with coastal sage scrubs. The rancher wonders, why doesn't everyone do this? He doesn't realize it is greatness to see potential when everyone else sees menace. Those immigrants invading like Mediterranean grasses, Spanish broom, yellow star thistle, weed them out, those seekers or the downtrodden, downthrusted, the ones bereft of four walls invading the city, choking out the libraries, the beaches, get them away from us. And the homeless man who has a roof now doesn't realize his life is a poem when he says, living on the streets takes your dignity away. How his life was on the edge of felling, so much like a weed in a garden, he could pluck himself out. And now he lives in a new home on a ranch near a person who takes a risk, digs a foundation, offers the horses, the owls, the steelheads also endangered. Thank you. Okay, so these next few are a chapter in the book that never happened. I wanted to have a sports section. I tried to think of comics, but that didn't work. So But the sports section actually came and then it didn't make it into the book. So I wanted to read those tonight. The first one is NCAA champions from Charlottesville refuse White House invitations. Holding the trophy, their multicolored brown, dark brown, creamy brown faces jubilant. No thanks, Mr. President. Next one, Amy Palmiero Winters, amputee, runs 140 miles in the desert. Sahara, artificial foot stuck under a rock, airways shut down, sand papering on skin, sun violated, wind stormed, hobbled, listening to Eminem. Nobody believed in him either. Next one. Golden State Warriors beat the Houston Rockets in Game 6. No Kevin Durant, calf strained. Curry misses shots first half. Fans getting ready for a funeral. Only the Dubs coming back from the dead. And the last one, defeated. Between triumph and disaster, 4 tiny points. Defeated, drubbed, edged out, injured, already a past tense, but not for long. Okay, and this next one, I wrote this one after a friend and I went to the movies. He was in a very dark place, as you'll hear in the poem. And then we saw this movie, which, if you haven't seen it, it's called Call Me by Your Name. And it's just a beautiful, just a beautiful is the only word I can think of. So, and so that's what this poem is about. It's called Wheelchair Elegy. Flying up, crossing over, going forward, always and always with death to come. And before that, the dishonor of growing old. And that's not by me. That's an epigraph by Jack Gilbert, actually. Okay. Motoring forward toward the theater, your twisted body slumped in the metal carriage, expert wheels cornering the street. Your stiff frame cramped, one arm folded, rich with your disease. We go to the movies for solace. Emptiness hangs around you like black paint on the night's canvas. The place your dog left vacant, a hole, a crater, a ditch. You feel him everywhere, one eye blue, the other brown, looking for you in the dark. You weep. This wasn't supposed to happen. And your wife suffered so before she left a decade before. Oceans of lament seep into the large room. Your chair wheels begin to float. The dog, his death, now friends, sinking in their sleep. They go to bed, never get up. It's breaking into you, the winter, the pitchy cold of it. Your chair as companion, long-term friend, now more like a warden. All the things you cannot do anymore, and more to come. The tides eroding you. On the screen, a movie so extravagant in beauty, a peach plucked from its tree, an apricot squeezed into juice, sweet nectar of life. It wasn't supposed to be like this, life calling out for more. Thank you. And okay, and this is the last one. This is from my book in the arts and entertainment section. And it's called Paul Barton Plays Piano for Elephants. The piano fountainhead of a congregation of elephants, sick, abused, retired, a man's hand skimming the keys. Animals stop, listen, flap ears, reach trunks around to sniff aura of the instrument aspect of the man. Elephants straggling about, free now, shielded. The piano sitting on the dirt in a park, surrounded. Picture it. Sings a plain song, a man playing Bach to a creature large enough to kill him, stomp up his keyboard, stands transfixed. The man gives bananas at first to make a good impression, helps to memorize his smell, connect him to the sounds. Walks with a group sometimes, the blind ones. Even if they knew where the piano got its keys, what would they do? Crush it? This cruel, splendid coincidence, this moonlight sonata under the stars, these behemoths swaying. Thank you so much. It's been really fun to read to you.
That was beautiful, Phyllis.
Oh, thank you, Amanda.
So much. One of the things that I noted through the whole reading is just your commitment to chronicling aging. And it strikes me that you opened with such a humorous poem, and I was laughing at your written driver's test poem because I just took my teenager through that process, but to hear the other side of it, that it's but I really connect that actually with the movie poem that you just read, and both of those are in second person, but very different second persons. That's the driver's test. You're taking on the language of the driver's test and almost talking to yourself, and then that address to a friend. But I wonder, are those connected in your mind, and is there a way we can think about point of view and how you're using point of view in your poems as you chronicle all of this?
Those two I never had thought of as being connected, actually. But it's really interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah, it's interesting to think how you use you versus I versus they. Yeah, I had one poem in my book that had to be they. It just didn't feel like it should be we. And, sometimes it's really hard to even know why you're doing it. And then you get to the editing and you try to figure it out. Sometimes you can. So.
Yeah, I love that both of those exist in these really contemporary spaces too, the movie theater and the DMV, and that you're still able to find some poetry in those places.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I had to write about the DMV. That I probably comes through. I was just terrified of failing that test. It was kind of like, what happens if you fail? I mean, I know you get to take it again, but just the thought of failing was just too awful. So.
Yeah, well, my daughter passed her behind the wheel test too, but the whole time cool. I was sweating back at the
exactly, yeah,
back at the ranch. Exactly. Well, you usher us through with such beauty, and you offer us so much figurative language, and something that I notice is all of them just team with analogy and with simile and metaphor. That to examine your mother, you examine the black rhino, and we learn. And I guess I'm really curious about where your image systems come from, and where that desire, to couple the darkness with such beauty comes from, and how do you architect that in your writing?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm laughing because I don't do this very much anymore, but for quite a while I got this app on my computer that has images, wallpaper for the screensavers. And so I would find different screensavers, and then I would just use, steal the images off the screensavers and figure out a way to make it work in the poem. So so that's where I used to do it that way. I don't know exactly how I just kind of try to think about things. And also, like you, I read a lot. And I try to read something right before I write a poem of my own. And sometimes I'll get an image from that. So it's a kind of borrowing maybe, but Yeah,
Little
so those are just a
patchworking.
couple of ways. Yeah, patchworking. Yeah, yeah. Well, these
I
are,
like that idea of finding the images sort of randomly on wallpaper, but making them work. That's how our brain works, right? Making those connections unexpectedly. But that must be why your images feel so fresh and surprising
oh,
sometimes.
thank you. Another thing I do too is I'll look on Goodreads for quotations. Sometimes I'll do a search like quotations on grief, and then I'll just read a bunch of them. And if anything strikes me, I'll try to incorporate that.
Mm,
So yeah, I like
lovely.
to like piggyback off of other things. It's hard for me to just sit and write something, on my own.
Interesting. I also, you started by saying that you were working on another book when the newspaper poems came. Do you want to tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that project and where it is right now?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? Let's do that after you read, okay? Because
Okay.
I was thinking maybe you could talk about that too with your book and how you said you had three books that you could have written at that time. So
I
yeah,
mean, that maybe I have enough poems for 3 books at this
for
point.
three
I just
books
can't.
still.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So all right, yeah. Well, so I guess I should introduce you now. And actually, what I realize is that I'm not going to be quite as seamless as you were because I don't think I have. I need to find your. I need to find our flyers so I can actually read that. Okay, here we are. Okay, so Amanda Moore is a poet and essayist whose work has appeared in journals and anthology, including Best New Poets, Ziziva, and Catapult. As a poetry editor for Women's Voices for Change, she has also published in depth essays about extraordinary poems by women, with a special focus on contemporary poems such as Patricia Smith, Monica Yoon, Joy Harjo, Ellen Bass, Molly Spencer, and others. She teaches high school English as well as private poetry classes for adults, and she also reads and edits for Vita Review and Bull City Press. She's an avid ocean swimmer, making her home in the outer Sunset neighborhood of San Francisco, with the Pacific just a few blocks away. Amanda's book, Requeening, won the 2020 National Poetry Series and was selected by Ocean Vuong. It was also named in Oprah Magazine's 2021 Favorite Things issue. For more information about Amanda, her work and her teaching, visit her website, which we have in the chat. Oh, there's so much more that I'd like to say about you, but I will hold off and let you go ahead and read.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just set my timer because I tend to. Where does the time go? I want to thank everyone so much for being here. It's lovely to see so many new faces and new names, but also some real beloveds in the audience today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to read a little from Requeening, which came out in October, and I've been reading exclusively from it for so long. So I'm also very excited to honor the spirit of this reading and read some poems I've written in the pandemic and some newer pieces. Phyllis is so lovely, and she had her poems up on the screen. I am going to read from my book, which I know means I'm looking down a little, but I can't get over how exciting it is to even have a book. So I haven't, and I like to switch it up. I'm going to read some in response to Phyllis's poems. But I'll start with the very first poem in the book. I use a lot of, Phyllis mentioned at the beginning, bees. I use bees as sort of a controlling metaphor in this book and a way to organize some of the poems. They're a lifelong obsession. I've been studying bees and writing about bees for 20 years. And so I find my way in and out of bee poems throughout. I just can't seem to escape it. I love poetic obsessions, and that's mine. So I'll start with the very first poem in the book, which is Opening the Hive. Late afternoon slants, illuminates the worn white husk of hive and gleams like an incubator bulb on the oval of an egg. This might have been the way I was born, to move over my mother and wash from her what was left of painful birth, her legs like the old wood cracked with a hive tool, my lips clamping and the bees burrowing into honeycomb, bathed in sweetness, a taste fresher when robbed this way. Smoke to calm, to push the heaving down, down to the center where the queen hides and is stroked, flanked by the upturned rumps of guard bees, wings fanning scent in warning. I open this small universe and set it in motion, a new heart ready to be fed and broken and fed again, gathering strength to reseal and take into itself what we leave behind. Fingerprints through broken comb and crushed drones. This might have been the way I was born, then set to life. Stolen honey clinging to light hair that covers everything new. Like late afternoon sunlight, a kiss on my dented forehead, mother collapsed and emptied of poison, barbed stinger, and the baby, the jelly, the bee. I think of the hive as sort of a domestic space. And so throughout the poem or throughout the book, I have a couple of different poems written about those domestic spaces, the homes that I've made over the years. I'm tempted to read my one about Michigan, since I heard there were Ann Arbor residents in the audience, but instead I'm going to read the one about my childhood home. It's called 1729 Maple Avenue, Northbrook, Illinois. Gone the marriage, the father, gone the plum tree out front, its wild confetti, steady shade, and sticky fruit blotching the sidewalk. Gone the fence we'd be set to paint once a year, white droplets sprinkling the hostas, black house numbers trailing down the upright pole. The birch tree and its paper scrolls, the slap of the side door on its ancient hinge, the hook and eye lock, gone. The limestone gravel drive, my sisters and my sock tender feet callousing each summer as we dared one another to race across. Gone the garage, its detritus and stash in the rafters. Gone the radiant heat hot spots on the floor, the pull down stairs to the attic and its boxes, old clothes and steam weak cardboard and crumpled bags. Gone the window unit AC that kept one bedroom frigid while the rest of the house sweltered and swooned, and the furniture we lugged from room to room, always remaking. Gone the many couches and the weights they held, the transom windows and their cranks, the big bay that once collapsed beneath a roof of half-melted snow. Gone the dishwasher, rolled out from the pantry to hook to the sink, skinnying around it on tiptoes to reach the stove. Gone the white phone anchored to the kitchen wall and who we called on it. Gone the extra long cord we would stretch to reach our bedrooms, the rubbery spirals pulled tight. Gone the record player, the VCR, the CDs, the DVDs, the cable box, long gone. The raspberry bush out back, my turned up t-shirt, bottom heavy with fruit for breakfast, the jonquils and crocus that would shoulder through snow-lashed dirt come spring. Gone the creek, north branch of the Chicago River that would swell some summers, tip over its banks. Gone the plans to ford it or to build a bridge. Gone the single mother, her blue eyeshadow, silk blouses, sour smell of nylons, hot and pointy shoes. Gone her gentle nature and her rages too. Gone the grandmother, afternoon visits, her handbags and bridge mix. Gone her magic and unwanted advice, the joy, the strife, the nesting dolls we were. Gone the death that wedged us open, the green in the windows, the wild, the ordered harmony, and what we knew about the world then, gone. The shelter women give one another, rough love flooding the house and yard. I think I'll go back to bees. In addition to poems about daughterhood, there are lots of poems about motherhood in the book. And obviously bees is a matriarchal society. That's part of the appeal. I didn't write very many poems from the point of view of a bee, but this is the only one in the book that made it into the book. So I guess it's a persona poem written from the perspective of a worker bee, but it's a voice that feels pretty familiar to me. It's called The Worker. Each cell, tidy and tight with brood, what's mine now is sunshine and breeze, a gyre of pleasure and labor within. I can carry it all. Crumb of flower, spittle and weight, apple tree, blueberry, what they need but don't want, gloved hand or swab. From a crack in concrete, from weed and bombshell, I'll pull nectar and sweet, a surplus stacked neat and ready for plunder. My flight even is beauty and my churr in the air, the way I scatter beam and your attention. But I am tired of being the sting, of closing the door in winter and sifting wing dust and limb out front come spring. I am vain in a seething heart of heat, a single platelet pumped through the bright organ. Alone, I canker and peak. I don't want to be vengeance, to see in this world only what I might yet forget to lance. So I circle and comb, tend brood, carry out the dead, lead all our voices to thrum. Without bees, we wouldn't have flowers. So I was on a residency up in Petaluma in one of the most gorgeous places. And this was right as I was finishing the book. And there were calendula all over. I've never seen so many. So one of the motherhood poems that I wrote that was very toward the end of the process is this poem called Calendula. Through weed and tangle, a flower at every portal, tiny rings of fire expanding, then folding each day with sun. These blooms, their shatter of petals, needles of orange light, nothing you can suture together, like a woman, like me, small scar, single stitch I took, though we had anointed the doorway her body would make of me. We had traced it and traced it, not with blossom, but its ointment, which he, nothing else to do during the push, applied to keep me from tearing. Oh well, here in the blazing garden, lazy white moth drift, rooster crow and bluster all day long, I pressed a single bud in the back of a book to preserve something, its color maybe, its watery stalk. I popped some leaves in my mouth to taste the name. Marigold, little calendar, weather glass, clock that ticked those hours and minutes, the seconds and me unfurling. How I worked to open. Phyllis writes a lot about her mother, which is something I really admire. I write a lot about my daughter, which has been interesting having this book in the world and negotiating that territory with her. As I said, she just passed her driver's license. So those of you who have walked this path know the hell that I'm in some days and the joy others. I found in writing about her adolescence, the haibun form, which is a Japanese poetic form that combines prose with a little tiny haiku at the end, was a really lovely way to navigate the tensions that we have been experiencing, mother, daughter, child, woman. I just think the liminal space of the haibun was really helpful in processing. So I'm going to read a haibun. I'm trying to decide which one to read. I'll read, since I know we have a good poetry crowd. This is one that takes some inspiration from Wilfred Owen's poem, Dulce et Decorum Est. Perhaps you're familiar with it. So this is called Sweet and Fitting Haibun. His is about World War II, and mine is about raising a teenager. Or World War I, forgive me. Sweet and Fitting Haibun. Bent double, cinched in contraction and blind with anticipation, I labored to bring forth her tiny body, till on the safe and ordered world of hospital, we turned our backs and trudged toward life without rest. Drunk with joy, we survived night feeding and weaning through tummy time and temper tantrum to the ecstasy of late toddlerhood. Some independence, easy laughter, deep devotion. Hung like twin planets in her consciousness, we were gravity, inspiration, divinity, not soldiers, but soldiering. There was rapture in years 6 and 7, in her spunk and clever wit, and then some sass at 8 or 9 we weathered. It's not the same as war, I know. I do not suffer, as one gasped. But when the hormones dropped like bombs and the outside world seeped in at last, she began to turn from me. I faltered in my advance, walked around aflame with adolescence. Her easy dismissal pierced my heart's weak shield and battlement, but was no preparation for full assault. Rage at nothing, pure hatred's countenance, impatience with my very breath and speech. What could I do? I folded my dreams in her lunchbox and slipped her a $10 bill. Soon there will be curfews and half-truths, maybe some nudes, beer or weed on her breath, a piercing or tattoo. If someone had told me I would become, like my own mother, bug-eyed and impatient, a traitor to my own intention, if someone had told me I would walk straight into a wall where I thought there was none, if someone had told me I'd sometimes rather chew off a limb than endure, well, even then, I would beg them, tell me the old lies, that it goes so fast, that it gets easier, that it's worth it, sweet and noble in the end. Morning dews each day. Still, the sun sets on horror as it does on joy. I wasn't going to read my melanoma poem, but oh, Phyllis, we have so many overlapping poems because there's also my Insomnia poem too. But I think in the spirit of Phyllis sharing hers, I will also share mine. Melanoma. The speck could have been the footprint of a tiny god alighting on my shoulder, but instead is devil, his blackened eye, harbinger, new moon, bottomless well. Will I too be brought down by a sliver of vulnerable flesh? Cup of midnight spilled where I cannot reach, errant mole, black hole, darkened window opening onto death's back porch. So much battle left in me, but for this chink in the armor, fingerprint of destruction, fatal kiss, burnt tip of match, just touched to the pyre. I'm not going to read my teaching poem, Phyllis, because I really do want to honor the spirit of your reading series and read some new poems, which I haven't. This is the first time I've read new poems in maybe a year, which is exciting. So I'm working on a book of poems informed by the ocean. I don't know if I'm actually working on a book, but I'm obsessed with the ocean. I swim out at Ocean Beach every single day. So I'm going to read one of those, and then I'll read 2 pandemic poems. This is called Lines Toward Grace, and it's about a correspondence that I've had with somebody who's incarcerated at San Quentin. Lines toward Grace. In his letter, Greg asks if I say a prayer before I go out on the water, but each morning I am silent at the ocean's edge. I run into breakers over mucky sand where mole crabs poke at my soles, creatures more aware of harm than I am. Terns and gulls twirl and dive, and I spot a dorsal fin, humpback, its pluming exhalation, and wait, its fluke. I slip beneath the surface to try to hear its benthic song. If I ask Greg how to pray, he will tell me to listen to some inner voice. He does not know death is my only guide. In the water, I don't hear the whale, but know it swims beneath me by the vortex of birds above. I am half pressed to sea, half open to sky. Later, I will write and ask, is this a prayer? Greg goes by eagle inside. Creature of air, he is tethered to earth. At the end of each letter, he draws a wing like a wish. His concern for the life I cast into ocean is as lucky as swimming with the whale or my whole existence. Nothing I deserve, but mine to take. Now, I said I would stop writing about my daughter after my book, but as you all know, we've been inside our houses for a very long time. It's almost nostalgic to look back at those early weeks and months, but this is from that. It's called On the 43rd Day of Sheltering in Place. Do you remember way back then? So on the 43rd day, my daughter tells me the body releases oxytocin when you hold your own breasts. And so we do it, both of us, there in the kitchen, waiting to feel something good. We'll try anything these days for comfort. Catch wild yeast to raise a loaf of bread, dose ourselves with bitter chocolate, howl out the window with our neighbors. This is what it is to live through history. Midnights, we lie side by side in the middle of the great highway, closed to traffic, and later bicker over every small thing, each unwashed dish or misplaced shoe. Our daily walks, sometimes forced, sometimes arms linked and alive to beauty we rush to write down after we doff our masks and wash our hands. Rainbow signs in windows, ceanothus thick with bees. We are not the first to sit silent and still on a seawall, to watch the angle of the sun's path shrink for hours while the world falls to grief around us. And this is a strange grace, this tenderness we find. Of course, we will be marked by it. I mean, beyond the fear, the way our very bodies in proximity are as much menace as balm. She lets me take her by the hand. She doesn't always want to, but today she lets me hold it. And the last one I wanted to read for Phyllis and Renee and Kathy, who I missed getting to go to the museum with recently. But remember those beautiful days in June and July when we were out in the world a little bit more, when things were looking up. So this is about sort of getting to go to MoMA for the first time. Museums are a lifeblood for me. So this is called Touched in Some Way and at Last. Enough of the sea. Let's talk about my new pair of shoes that look better than they feel. I'll blister after a mile, but will smile the whole time. How wonderful to have a place to go and time to be there. We may choose to be late, We may choose the elevator or the stairs. We'll wear our hair fresh, shorn, and styled, falling smartly at our chins. If you haven't seen the Twombly in a while, we must. Saying so isn't careless anymore. So once you come along in a tight new dress, comfort is overrated now, but not beauty. If we have forgotten conversation, we'll look to the walls for words. See how his line approximates letters, how time past approximates a kind of life. It will be good to be once more in architecture. I'll wait for you in the lobby. How I love a lobby where I can be jostled, nudged, elbowed, shoved, or even bumped. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. That was just fabulous. And I'd like to ask everybody to unmute now. And we could give Amanda a round of applause. So, wow. So here, Georgina just says, so much tenderness and beauty in your poems, Amanda. Thank you. Your book happily sits on my bookshelf.
Georgina, thank you. That's a good place to be. I've seen her bookshelf. She's an amazing reader.
And it sits right here in my lap, actually. So I just thought I'd show you with all the little markers. Thank you for reading the poems. Most of them you said you were going to read. That was great.
I really wanted to read the teaching poem for you too. I'll just read it just for you another day.
Oh, all right. Okay. That'll be a treat. Yeah. So let's see. I know I have a lot of questions to ask Amanda. And let's see, Anne Harding Woodworth says, beautiful reading. Thank you to both of you. Great conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Anne. I know there's probably a lot of things in the chat, but I see Renee has her hand up. So why don't we start with Renee?
When does Renee not have her hand up? Okay, yes, I do have a question for Amanda because this came up for me when I tried to write a haibun for the first time. And in our little group, people decide, or sort of the reaction was it didn't need the haiku. And so I'm wondering what your thought process is, or how you approach maybe prose poem versus haibun, you know, like a prose poem plus a haiku. When does it need a haiku? Yeah, any thoughts that you might have on that kind of process?
You know, it's interesting, Renee, I haven't written haibun about anything other than my daughter's adolescence. And I think part of it is that even as I set out to work with that form, I found something similar, that the haiku felt extraneous, or it felt separate from the rest of the poem. But for the adolescent poems, that separateness or that turn or that twist felt really essential, that there needed to be a different register, or that nature needed to come in somehow. I think about the turn toward the natural world from this very human, weighty prose poem. And then I also think the difference between the prose poem, where I really do, I'm heavy in my syntax, I'm working a lot with rhyme and sound, to just lighten it and cut it away, even if sometimes it feels counterintuitive. Those moves feel really necessary to me. But I don't know that I have advice. I mean, I think when you're committed to the haibun, you're committed to the form, and that haiku belongs there, but it's how you deploy or use the haiku that's important. And it can't be the same as the poem. It can't work in that same register. And I don't think it's as successful when it's a summary or a coda. I really think it does have to take on a different turn or a different voice.
Thank you.
But good luck. I can't wait to read the. And I think sometimes, yeah, you have to just like double down and say that this is important to me. This is, I want to write this in the haibun form. And you know, I think for me studying, I don't mean to, sorry to go on, but I will just say quickly, for me studying the history of it and knowing how Basho was using it in the 17th century as a travel log makes me think that there has to be some motion too, that the history of the form comes into play.
So yeah, I just want to say, I didn't really know what a high bun was until, I don't know, not that long ago. So, yeah, so maybe we should, why don't you say a little more about what a high bun is?
Well, actually, I
Amanda.
have an essay about
Oh,
about
right.
it that you can read on Catapult, where it's a 17th century form. Basho wasn't the first person to write in it, but he is the person who popularized it in Japan, in the narrow road to the interior, or the narrow path to the interior, depending on who translated it. And it's a long travelogue that actually pivots back and forth between poem, haiku, poem, haiku. It's a very arduous path that he took. And for me, when I read it and go back, I see the different register, the different voice that comes in. And then really post Basho, in my own studies, I didn't trace a lineage until more contemporary poets like Forrest Gander, who we know is a great travel log poet. He writes a lot of haiku in his Core Samples book, and Kimiko Han is using the form. And in all of those places, it seems to me they're poets who are navigating some territory.
Thank you. Did I mention consummate teacher in my?
I can't not teach. It's true.
Oh, I just heard a quote. Oh gosh, now I won't be able to remember, of course. It was a famous musician, Itzhak Perlman. He said never lose the opportunity to teach, because you will give something, and you will also learn from doing it. So there you go. Cool.
I heartily, yes, I was just preparing my lessons for this week, and I read 2 things I've never read before and learned something. So I guess I would agree with him.
Yeah, it really goes a long way. So other questions from our wonderful group here? It's so lovely to have you all.
How do you make a question?
Oh, please, Kathy.
Oh,
Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
I may not know the proper protocol here on Zoom. I'm just raising my hand. Yeah, so I'm interested in hearing from both of you really about these other books. Poems that were going to come into being as one thing and fell by the wayside. Do tell.
Cool.
Both of you. Yeah.
Should I start? I can start on that. Yeah, because I brought it up at the beginning. So the book that I was going to write, the other one fell by the wayside. It was going to be called The Stories I Didn't Tell. And I actually had a title poem by that name, which is a poem about Scheherazade that I wrote it was a writing prompt. So it was about stories that, and I had a lot of stories in there, and actually a lot of those poems went into the book about the news. So there really weren't that many left outside, but I don't think it wasn't the right one. So I'm really glad that the chapter titles weren't as interesting to me. I was going to make them different stories, like love and adventure and children's and things like that. But yeah, I find it really, I like trying to fit a book together. So we could talk about that too. Amanda, the way your book is put together is just, it's a miracle, really, that it's so beautiful. But why don't you talk about your process with your book?
Well, I had 20 years worth of poems that I think, I wasn't really interested in a book for a while. And I really saw them as 2 separate manuscripts up until the summer of 2019. I still remember really clearly. I had, for me, it felt like the illness and grief poems and death and dark poems almost contaminated the young mother and the young wife poems. I really saw them as separate books, and I didn't want them to exist together until I thought about all of these bee poems and started thinking about the life cycle of the hive and the idea of the matriarchy that allowed for collapse to come in. And there's a section of the book that starts with collapse. And when I just let that come into the space along with the more life affirming or beginnings of the hive, it just all of a sudden made sense to me, and it was really easy to organize. But it did mean that I cut, in joining those two books, I cut 50 poems that a lot of travel poems. There were a lot of external, outside of the domestic sphere, that are now, untethered somewhere on my desktop. And who knows if they'll come back, if they'll
exactly
find a way into another collection.
Yeah. So do you have chapbooks as well? Have you, or is this your first book in general?
This is my first book. I think I threw together some chapbooks only because that seemed more manageable. And I do love a good chapbook. I like to buy them. It seemed somehow more manageable. And maybe that's what my water poems or my surfing poems will become, because I don't see sustaining that for a whole collection. And actually, I'd kind of like to do a collection that is less tightly compressed or structured. Maybe something with a little more ranginess would be fun.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I must be on your wavelength, because I was going to ask you if you were going to write more about the water. So I'm so glad to know you're doing that. Yeah.
I don't want to keep writing about, again, these obsessions that we're driven by, but I find that, I get to the page and I find myself, oh, am I writing about dawn again? Am I writing about the ocean again? I can sit down to write a poem about my wooden kitchen table, and then I'm in the ocean by line 17. It just is. So I've got to let it happen and pass through me, sort of like the bee poems.
Or the ocean is in your kitchen or something, right?
Yes, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Well, so, there's so much about how your book is constructed and put together. And I know you've talked about that a lot in other interviews. But I'd really love for you to talk more about that tonight, because I think it's there's so much depth and so much to say about it.
Well, I think it really does follow the life cycle of the hive, and it sort of starts with the opening of the hive and the starting of the birth and the motherhood, and the using that allows me to get the idea of requeening a hive is when you're replacing the queen bee. And putting that at the center of the book allows it to open both ways. So it's both about being a daughter, right? So if you're becoming this worker bee, you eventually replace the queen. But it's also, about motherhood. How do you make way for that maternal succession? And so allowing that in really just that's the first part of the book, is thinking a little bit about the hive, about the work that's involved in maintaining the hive. There's a very little bit about the nuptial flight, I would say. There's there are a couple of marriage poems, but a lot of those got cut when I was writing, or when I was finally sort of structuring this book, because marriage really isn't part of the hive. It's a matriarchy. The drone, his role is very, very small and at the beginning. And then, this idea of hives failing allows the whole second part of the book to exist, both the complications of maternal succession and when you are growing up and replacing the queen in the hive, but then also the ways in which hives can fail through illness and loss. So I think that's really how it's structured. The very last section is about after swarm. When you've been a very bad beekeeper, as I often have been, you lose your hive because they swarm away, because you haven't taken care of them. But there's still life. You can requeen, you can get your swarm back, or you just sort of live in the wake of that. And that last section is just one short poem and then a prose piece. I don't really know what that form is. It's sort of a little essay, a lyric essay that opens actually the door to the surfing too.
Yeah. So I also love the way that you go back and forth in chronology in the different chapters. So, and was that something that you how did you come to decide that? I thought that was I think it works just so beautifully. Like, 1 minute you're conceiving, and then 2 pages later, there's a teenager there. It's just like really cool how you did that.
Well, it's all happening at the same time anyway. I mean, I really do feel like all of our experiences are, I'm still the mother of a toddler in my heart. Like there's just, when you look at your teenager, that's what you see in many ways. So I feel like that simultaneity is important to me. The people I've lost are still very much in the present tense in my life. And also the book did feel really structured, overwhelmingly structured. So as much as possible, I did want to chip away at that idea of chronology or narrative and allow some of those layers to seep through.
Yeah. So there's a question here from Abby in the chat. Amanda, in putting together your book, did you have in mind the future at all? As in, where is this all headed, and where will my readers progress to without me? Great question.
No, I don't think about the future. I really try not to think about the future. I couldn't even think of the reader, actually, when I was putting together the book. I was thinking of the poems, and I was trying to listen to the poems' logic and thinking about where they wanted to be in relation to one another. And it's really only since the publication and having to be in this really public conversation about the book that I was thinking, how was I never thinking about the reading experience or thinking about what this leaves? And I guess the only lie I'm telling is that I did think about how it would affect my daughter. And so I was thinking about that future. What was it going to be like between us when this conversation was out in the world? And trying to have that conversation with an irrational 14-year-old at the time, who just was like, I don't want to be your censor, and I don't want to read it, and I don't want to talk about it. So I was maybe thinking about her, but I wasn't thinking about where readers would progress to or without me. That's a good question, Abby. I want to ask Abby how it's.
Me too. Does Abby want to speak, or maybe not?
Oh, she says she was told at one point my readers were concerned for my well-being, which was not something I wanted.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Abby.
That's interesting, because I guess I don't think of that at all. And I didn't really call Phyllis out, but when I was saying, she's so apologetic about her dark poems, there's so much darkness in the world. And I find both yours and Abby's poems are working to couple that with beauty and to transform those dark experiences into something where we can see the beauty. So that's important. And if it's a hard poem to read, then it's a hard poem to read.
Yeah, there is that whole question about, how do you read something dark without apologizing? And if you don't say something, sometimes I find that people feel kind of shocked. They're just so stunned, so it's hard. It's a little bit of a learning process to figure out how to bring those poems in a way that feels balanced.
It's really hard. Yeah, I do. There's a little echo, but as a high school teacher right now, my students cannot read anything that's hard. I mean, it's just such a struggle. We had some upper level students really rebel against reading a novel in one of their classes because they found it too challenging and too traumatizing and traumatic. And it's interesting to think of, the reading that we choose to do outside of school versus the reading that you're assigned to do. I'm excited to know Abby's being so sensitive to that.
So before Mary Marcia has a good question too, but before I get to that, I just, I wanted to say this whole notion of putting out things into the world that is difficult and personal. That's been a really, what I want to say, it's been really very fulfilling for me, actually. I was just terrified. When this book came out, I was just like hiding in the corner because I thought, somebody's going to say something that's going to just rip me to shreds, and I didn't know if I could take it. So, really luckily that didn't happen. But, particularly not so much the book or what they thought of the book, but more some of those really personal things that were in there. So, but as I did that, and then that happened, and now, I'm doing more, and I keep getting more encouragement from you and everybody in our group, and just in general, it feels like such an important way to do this healing process that and it really seems to be helping. So when a lot of other things maybe wouldn't help so much. So but you write it for yourself, of course. That's really important. So I don't know if you want to speak about that too. Like there's some really, really tough, difficult poems in your book too.
I would say, yeah, I mean, I have a real sense that I can't control the poems once I've written them and sent them into the world. That writing the poem is really different than publishing the poem.
Yeah.
And thinking about where it will live in someone's body, and also like just being okay. I think maybe being a teacher has made it easier for me to understand that what I believe the poem to be may not be what the reader believes the poem to be or to be about.
Right.
And readers are reading with their own experiences in their hearts and in their heads and in their hands. And so there's a way in which I just really trust. I think what I love and what I realized is so exciting about having a book is having that relationship with strangers that I've always wanted, being in that conversation with them and not knowing I'm in conversation with them, and trusting that,
cool.
Yeah, and that's why, with you too, I hear you talking about your pain and processing your pain through poetry. For me, I think people have asked me in the past if I was writing my poems about cancer while I was going through it, and the answer is no. And nor was I writing about young motherhood when I was a young mother. These are poems where I've already processed that, and it's a way for me to maybe just seal it up in an envelope and send it off.
Interesting. Oh, really interesting. So let's see. So Mary Marcia has a question. Was your manuscript shopped around, or did you already have a sense where you would send it? That's a great question.
That's a really good question. When it was 2 manuscripts, those manuscripts were shopped around. But the reason I can so clearly place 2019 on the calendar is it was a summer that I received some sabbatical funding from my high school, and I took some workshops and I took some time to really create this manuscript. So that was the end of 2019. And I entered it that fall into the contests that one does. And I found out I was a finalist for the National Poetry Series at the same day that I found out I was a finalist for another contest, and I pulled it from the other contest because I really felt like it was worth taking a chance on the National Poetry Series, which felt really risky because I thought, oh my gosh, I have a bird in the hand. I think the editor was clearly saying to me, don't pull your manuscript. Trust me, you don't want to pull your manuscript. And I was being very quiet. Oh, trust me, I do. I promise I'll resubmit next year. But what I was secretly saying in my head was, I just want to wait to hear from the National Poetry Series.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
And it was great. I was teaching online that day and just in this format. And my phone kept ringing with a strange phone number from Connecticut. And I looked down and I saw that whoever it was had left a voicemail. And I opened the voicemail and the first sentence was, "Hi, Amanda, this is Ocean Vuong," in his lovely lilting little voice. And I just started crying. I mean, I knew what he was going to say, but I didn't know he was going to be the judge or he was going to be the person who accepted it.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. So Renee wants to know what the novel was that your students didn't want to read.
Oh, it's so complicated, Renee. It was Junot Diaz's Oscar Wilde, The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And it wasn't in my class. It was in the Modern American Literature class, which I don't teach. But of course, they were feeling very complicated around who he is. And then the first 40 pages of the book are told from the perspective of a character who's not a very kind person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But this was after they read Beloved. So it was also really interesting. I wondered if they were fatigued on trauma, or, beloved for my very affluent majority white students in the school that I teach, maybe didn't come as close to home as the much more contemporary Oscar Wilde. But I think we're just moving, we're 2 years into a trauma, a shared trauma. Their resilience
Right.
in terms of literature is lowered.
Yeah. So, who else has some questions? Does anyone want to speak up, or we can just keep talking too? And actually, we're getting close to finishing up. So,
I have a question and a
Perry,
comment. Hi.
cool.
I love both of your readings. Both of your poems are wonderful,
Thank you.
and tender and brave and courageous. With the comment that was just made about, we're just into 2 years of trauma. Have either of you found that this is affecting any of the new poems you're writing now? I find that what's very popular now are poems that have to do with lots of joy, and how you can find happiness. And there's a lot of authors out there. Maybe, Ross Gay is writing his wonderful poems, and Amy Etsukuma Tatel, if I'm pronouncing her name right. And these are very popular right now. And I'm wondering if it's affecting you in any way that you think you should, write happier poems or address the trauma. There's a lot of things out there now. They're publishing this and they're not publishing that. And we can't help but wonder, is this going to go over, if I send this out? Or does that mean anything to either of you? Or
Well, actually, I was going to ask you. It sounds like a good question for you to answer too, but we can go first.
yeah, I love hearing the two of you talk to each other, which is why I have a question.
Oh, okay. Well, so what do you think, Amanda? I have some thoughts about that. Do you?
When I think about the poems that I'm writing, it's funny that I love that you mentioned Ross Gay, because I was listening to him on the that wonderful podcast that David Nyman does, and the name of it is escaping me, but they're very long form podcasts. They're out of Portland, but Ross Gay was on the David Nyman podcast, and it's about an hour and a half long. And so I was listening to it while cleaning my house. And I have a poem that I wrote that day called "I Mop the Floor in Joy," or try to, and it comes from that. So I think absolutely I'm reaching for those more joyous poems, but they're poems then about mopping or about the birds on my windowsill. Our worlds have shrunk so much that it's almost essential, I think, both in the life I'm living and the poems I'm writing, to seek that joy. And maybe that's the ocean obsession, because I'm never happier than in those moments, right, as I'm emerging from the ocean. I just am sort of daffy and dopey over, this, every dawn is beautiful, even when it's foggy. And so maybe seeking out all that joy is making my poems more joyous. What about you?
Yeah, I think the same thing is happening to me, which except it's I just wrote something. I just wrote something called it may surprise you to know that I'm thinking about delight. And it's all about how I'd rather I'm usually thinking about babies getting murdered and horrible things and whatever, trauma and child abuse, and so maybe I'm surprising myself by thinking about it. But I wonder, Perry, it's if it's kind of this sense that it's just been so much, like we have to get out from under it somehow. It's such a burden, and how much can you take? And I stopped writing about the news. I just haven't felt like I've wanted to as much, like the way that I used to, like find a news story and write about it all the time. I would be doing that. So, but yeah, so what about you, Perry? What are you finding that too? The pull towards joy, or?
I am, but I haven't really thought about it that much until this moment when the comment just came up that I thought, maybe we talk about this. I'm I teach a couple of workshops, poetry workshops, and everybody is saying all the time, I am so sick of the news. I don't want to listen to the news. I just want to write happy things. I just want to write things that give me joy. And Phyllis, I thought about you actually this week because I thought, I wonder how Phyllis feels about that in her book about the news,
Right.
And I have found myself in the aging process, which you and I share, and me more than you probably.
Oh, well, just a little.
And I had a friend who writes a lot of poetry and publishes a lot, has won a couple of awards. She says, I don't want to write about aging. Nobody cares about aging anymore. But there's a lot of us aging. You say, oh, don't write about aging. People are tired about aging. So I almost feel like I can't help writing about it because it's what I'm living with, and then so Phyllis, I loved your poem about the writing exam, DMV. I mean, I just went through that myself when I hit 75, I did fail it the first time, and I love it. And I had to take it over. I missed it by one. And so I'm writing things that make me happy, that sort of, I mean, I was taking a walk 2 nights ago, our electricity went off, and there was this little boy telling me all about it. He was about 5 inches tall, but just talking, his father was holding him. And he was so excited to see this huge crane. And he kept telling me, more big, more big. And I thought, I love that. I'm going to write about more big because it made me so happy. And so I think we are affected, and that's a good thing in a way, because it's sort of like saying to the powers that be, poetry is even bigger than you are.
Awesome. Yeah.
I think this circles back to what Abby was asking about in terms of our awareness of readers. I never want to be having a conversation about, are people over my poems about aging, or are people over my poems about we should write what we want to write, and not be thinking about what's marketable or what. I mean, the great poetry machine will drive us all crazy, I think, if that's the way we're thinking about it. And I really love that you evoked Ross Gay, because his poem about Eric Gardner, just because he's writing about joy doesn't mean he's turning away from the responsibility to document what's happening with us. And especially as a white woman writing, I can't completely abandon myself to joy. I have to be aware of what I'm contributing to the world, and to find joy in those spaces, I think, is really essential.
Yeah. So, wow. What a great conversation. I see that we've reached our 5:30, and we certainly can go on. We're happy to do that. So, but if people need to leave, it's quite okay. And if you do need to leave, thanks so much for coming. And I think I think I was just wondering if we could throw that question open to other people who are writing in the group, and then once we talk about that for a little while, we could have a closing poem, which I just sprung that on you, Amanda. But just to finish up. And so how does that sound? Does anybody want to talk about this question about what you're writing about now, and how if you think it's been affected by the pandemic? Are you leaning more into positive, or all right. Well, okay, then maybe what we need to do is have a closing poem.
From me or from you?
Well, from us both. If that's okay.
Yeah, great. What are you going to read?
Well, I was going to read my poem about the coat. I like to read that at the end of things, and that is a very happy poem. So shall I go with that?
Yeah.
Okay, let me find it. Okay, it's called Incantation. The coat of a poet is patchworked warm, full enough to fit everyone inside. We rest together in its tent of permissions and omissions, admissions, intuitions, Paisley confessions. This inviolate space, this human-errored space. We are fledglings huddled in its skyscrapered air, smell of planets, of earth musk. Listen to the banter of spring as she loosens her leaf-felted robes. Birds flicker all around. Moles dig in. Beneath this coat, we eat chocolate dipped in more chocolate. Sweetness spills, drops of honey fold into spiced tea to soothe our plaid misfortunes. The coat of a poet has seams for fears, tears, for blisses, kisses of silk on skin. It breezes smoke out of pockets and into a glossy night. When we sleep, it's a love or a friend rests on a hook. If sleep is outside the window, it's our weighted blanket. Morning comes wearing woolly sunlight lightly around its shoulders. And now your turn.
Oh, I love that poem, Phyllis.
Oh,
I remember that.
Oh, thank you very
I
much.
was gonna try to read something fun, but instead I think, not that it's not fun, but I thought I would read something that maybe strives to do the recognition of sadness or of illness, but a turn toward joy. And it's the last poem in the book. It's called
cool.
After Swarm. As for when my first bees knit themselves together in a single sovereign self and slunk over the fence in search of their truant queen, I couldn't say, not with my own house to mind. They could have been gone for weeks when I noticed the hive grave still and empty of their chance. By then, a thing inside me, some rotten cell, had broken off too, though I didn't yet know it was sliding through a dark body system, the same stealth path as swarm, a channel not meant to be traced by eye or die until arrival, seething growth suspended low. Though I looked, I didn't find my missing bees, a fist of them dangling from a neighbor's tree, excised from the world, their hive left full of labor. I couldn't call them home. What an easy harvest, my first. No need to leave honey so bees could overwinter, measuring enough for me, enough for them. I cut wax caps from cell tops, spun out every drop, and took it all. Now, this last jar, all grit and crystal with age, it's time to order a new batch of bees for spring, clean the moldy hive brought down from rafters, and brush out my veil. I will be alive this time to what swells and roils the colony, the first cluster gathering on the fence line. I will heed.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. It's been such a joy to read with you, and thanks to everybody else who's been here too. And
Thank you.
been lovely. It's been a lovely evening.
Thank you all for spending Saturday night with us.
Thank you
Exactly.
very much. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Beautiful
Mm.
poems, beautiful poets.
Thank you.
Beautiful audience. Thank you all.
Thank
Yeah, really.
It's a nice
Goodness
pairing.
knows.
There were beautiful poems that the joy and also the moving on, the sadness, but expansion. I think we kind of need all of that during the pandemic. It's not, we crave laughter. They always have, but we also know we need to, poets help face whatever it is out there. And that's not always beautiful.
Right.
And, you
Very
know,
well said.
and recognizing the sadness brings us to the joy. As Amanda, your poem, you know, that wonderful jar of beautiful honey at the end, and that gorgeous coat, Phyllis, that you talk about. So thank you. It was perfect poems to end your reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.